There is no such thing as a fish.
Okay, I'm gonna try this one more time and then I'm gonna drop it. I'm gonna make this video as quick as possible because I know that it's pretty amusing that me saying humans aren't fish is gonna make me sound like I'm the one that doesn't know what I'm talking about for a very particular audience. But I promise, I know all of the same background science that you do, and it does not mean that you're a fish. This is a great example because birds are dinosaurs and you're not a fish. There is a difference. The reason is because Dinosauria is an actual scientific name for a group of animals that includes a common ancestor and all of its descendants. And any of those descendants, anything that's in that group is called a dinosaur because the name of the group is Dinosauria. That's how these terms work. They are scientific, specifically phylogenetic terms. Phylogenies are just like family trees of life, right? And any group that includes a common ancestor and all of its descendants, that whole thing is called a monophyletic group or a clade. So there is a clade called Dinosauria, which means anything inside that clade is a dinosaur. The difference is there is no clade. There is no monophyletic group called like Fischia or something, which means that if that were to exist, everything inside it would be called a fish. That's not how fish works. Fish is just a different kind of term. Dinosaur is a is a phylogenetic term because there's a scientific group of animals called Dinosauria. Fish is not that kind of word. Fish is just a colloquial term that means the things that you think of when you think of a fish. So even this is not quite right because some people watched my video and came away with the idea that like there's fish according to vibes and then there's fish according to science, and according to that then we're fish. But no. My point is that there is no fish science. There's no fish according to science, that is. Fish is not that kind of term. It's not a phylogenetic word. What is true is that humans are in an enormous monophyletic group of animals that includes all mammals and birds and reptiles and amphibians and some fish, including the coelacanth and lungfish. And that entire group is called the Sarcopterygiae, which makes us Sarcopterygians, just like how anything that's in Dinosauria is a dinosaur. Now here's where the problem starts, because the evolutionary sort of sister group to the Sarcopterygiae are called Actinopterygiae. And the way that a lot of people will refer to these groups using sort of common colloquial terms in order to distinguish what makes these two groups different when they diverged hundreds of millions of years ago is to call the Actinopterygiae ray-finned fish and to call the Sarcopterygiae lobe-finned fish. This makes pretty much good sense because at the time when these two groups evolutionarily diverged away from each other, all of the things in both groups are things that we would look at and go, those are fish. But they had different fin shapes, and so we call one of them ray-finned fish and the other lobe-finned fish. The key point is that ray-finned fish and lobe-finned fish are like common, colloquial, and helpful terms in some contexts, right? They're really useful because if we're trying to talk about these two groups diverging away from each other hundreds of millions of years ago, we want to talk about the useful difference between the two groups, then ray-finned and lobe-finned fish gets at that distinction. But all that phylogenetics says, all that the science of the relationship between clades says, is that we are Sarcopterygians. And that includes everything from mammals to reptiles to lobe-finned fish. It doesn't necessitate that we also be lobe-finned fish and that therefore we are fish. Now, people like to say things like this, that taxonomy just tells us that if you come from a certain sort of group of things, then you are also that group of things. So if any of our ancestors are fish, then we're fish, but that's not true. Carlo points out that all life on Earth is descended from microorganisms, but that doesn't mean that we are microorganisms, right? This is an awesome example because again, microorganisms is another term that's not a phylogenetic term. And that's fine. It basically just means anything that is alive, but smaller than this size cap. Great, that's a useful term. It doesn't have to be a phylogenetic term for it to be useful. It doesn't, just because there's not a monophyletic group of animals that all fit microorganisms, doesn't mean that microorganisms don't exist. In the same way, fish is not that kind of term. This basically spells out the opposing point really well. And Hank Green says implicitly this kind of thing. Again, Hank, I love you. But saying that like we just slap the label of fish on anything that we think of as a fish is fine. It doesn't mean that fish don't really exist. This assumes that monophyly is equated to reality somehow. There's no reason to do that. Now, for a lot of people, I think you'll understand that and still end up going like, yeah, but everything being fish is cool. And I get that. I do. It's fun to just say like, hey, did you know that like really, technically, we're all fish? But two problems. One is that like really, technically, we're not all fish. There is no, like, really, technically, we are Sarcopterygians, we are Osteichthyans, but neither of those things necessitate that we are really fish. And secondly, saying things like, hey, did you know that we're really fish, is really misleading, and it makes our terms less useful, way less useful. Our words should be useful. Just a fun little fact to share, not something that should be taken seriously beyond that. But again, it's not just a fact. Like, it is not a fact that science, phylogenetics, says that we are fish. That's not true. And I am going to take it seriously because when you say or imply things like that, people are going to be misinformed or misunderstand what the phylogenetics really does say. The science does say that we are Osteichthyans and sharks aren't, which means that a bass, which is another Osteichthyan, is more closely related to you and me than it is to a shark. And that's really cool. What the science also says is that we are Sarcopterygians. And bass are not, but coelacanths are, which means that coelacanths are more closely related to you and me than to a bass. That's also really cool, which means that all of the things that we think of as fish are not all more closely related to each other than some of them are to other things. And that's really cool. And you can say all of those things and understand all of those things without also saying, we are fish.